We're going to get started because we have a lot of information to cover this afternoon. My name is Ann Haubrick, and I'm the Grants and Programs Senior Manager at the Regional Arts Commission. We can't express enough how much we appreciate your time and commitment to the application review process. Thank you, thank you, thank you. It gives me great pleasure to introduce to you my colleagues in this work. Chloe Smith, Grants and Programs Manager. Hey, Chloe. And Lee Winter, Grants Operations Assistant.
Hello.
We've been hard at work to make this process fair and efficient. Before we get started, a couple of things. Please keep yourself muted unless it's interaction time or question and answer time. We'll do our best in the time we have to get to all of your questions. Our facilitator, Rudy Nickens, will be stopping at certain points to take questions. The PowerPoint for this session, as well as the recording, will be available on the RAC website on the application reviewer page by the end of the day tomorrow. And I will share a link in the chat in a little bit to get you directly to that resource page. Equity is a cornerstone of RAC's grant making. We're working to include equity in our criteria, applications, guidelines, and the reviewer process. Today is the first time we've done training specifically for our reviewer pool around bias awareness. This is a first step. So please be on the lookout for more trainings designed to increase your awareness and understanding of cultural competency and implicit bias. We want to equip you with the tools you need as a reviewer to rigorously review applications, challenge assumptions, and hold us, yourselves, and each other accountable for disrupting bias. Today's facilitator is no stranger to this work. Rudy Nickens is an executive coach, facilitator, educator, entrepreneur, and thought leader with expertise in cultural diversity, business management, and community development. For over 2 decades, Rudy has consulted, educated, and trained hundreds of local, national, and international organizations in workforce diversity, leadership, development, cultural competence, and conflict resolution. He specializes in efforts to eliminate the effects of internalized racism and sexism and violence against women. Prior to joining Evolution, where he's working now, Rudy Nickens was the Director for Equal Opportunity and Diversity for the Missouri Department of Transportation. In the wake of the death of Michael Brown Jr. in 2014, the governor asked Rudy to work with the Ferguson Commission, whose mission was to conduct a thorough, wide-ranging, and unflinching study of the social and economic conditions that impede progress, equality, and the safety in the St. Louis region. He has also served as executive director of the St. Louis Black Rep and vice president of St. Louis 2004, a civic organization created to act as a catalyst for community development. Beyond his organizational leadership roles, Rudy has owned and operated the Sunshine Inn for many years, which, in addition to having great food, was an institution that proved a place and resources for all kinds of community activity, from art to politics, to community organizing. And that's when I first met Rudy, way back then. Rudy earned a bachelor's degree in psychology from the University of Missouri, St. Louis, a Rockefeller Foundation Next Generation Leadership Fellow. He received the Ethics Project's inaugural Ambassador Andrew Young Award for Outstanding Leadership and the Robert Bradley Award for Distinguished Service. Rudy joined the Regional Arts Commission commissioners in August of 2022, and I proudly and happily present to you right now, Rudy Nickens.
Wow, thanks, Ann. If I had known you were going to read all that, I would have said, no.
It's all important. I wanted to edit it down, but it's all important, Rudy.
Well, thank you, and I'm honored. And let me just start with the same thing you started with, thanking everybody for taking the time to do this, for volunteering to be a reviewer, to making sure that you have, getting your mind wrapped around what it takes to really do a thoughtful and fair and open process. So I really appreciate it, both your time and your attention. And I promise that it's meaningful to me that you're doing this, and I want to just jump in here and have a conversation with you. As Ann said, I want this to be, imparting some information, but also a chance to just get you to think and engaged in the process, engaged in thought, feel free at any time to put a question or comment or thought in the chat, because that's really helpful. Just to know that you keep your mind going around as things come up, and if there's a question that you want to ask it. It's really okay. I look forward to talking with you. I don't have all the answers. I'll never pretend that, but here we're going to get started. So there's a way that you advance slides, Rudolph. There you go. So here's why we're here. We want to make sure that that grant applications receive fair reviewers that are free from as inappropriate influences as possible, and that reviewers understand the importance of adhering to the review criteria in preventing bias. Okay. So in the check-in part right now, if you want to, I want you to just put something in the chat about anything that you're arriving with, anything that you have questions about, anything that's important around this topic to you. Just use this as a chance to say, I have this thought or question or query, and I'll check it from time to time. Maybe I gotta learn how to do this thing faster, slower. Okay, so and in your reflection, here's the really thing I want you to consider is when you think about what's an experience you've had with bias, either you felt someone was biased against you, or you noticed that you showed bias towards someone else. All of us have biases. It's important to acknowledge that. And so if you can just think of something, you can write it in the chat, or you can just put it in your journal, or you can just sit with it in your head for a moment. Just put yourself in a moment where you notice that you had some experience of being targeted by someone else's bias or acting out your own in some way. So I'm going to give all kinds of ways to looking at and thinking about terms and definitions and perspectives over the next little bit of time. So remember what we mean by bias is it's the tendency to believe that some people are more or less than other people, more or less intelligent, more or less capable, more or less successful, more or less trustworthy, deserving, etc. Some biases are explicit. I absolutely know that I hold this attitude or stereotype, whether it's a positive one or a negative one. And so those are the ones that are like, okay, I can actually acknowledge these are the ones that I'm aware of. And you can consciously choose to make choices that honor or go against them. So that's what the reflection was a minute ago, was where you got to notice things that you are aware of around your own personal biases. And then following that, what have you done when you noticed them? Did you cave into them, act them out? What did you go, wow, that's an interesting way I think about something, and it's not necessarily helpful or true, so you get to interrupt it on a conscious level. That's what's great about explicit bias. But not all biases are explicit. The majority of the biases that we have are what we talk about unconscious or implicit. And those are the ones that we're not really aware that they are. And it's all in our brain. It's a habitual way of thinking that affects our understanding, our actions, our decisions. It's the attitudes that we hold about others that are influenced by factors other than active thought or reasoning. So not the ones that we talked about a moment ago that are explicit, but the ones that are just, it's there and I'm not sure where it came from. So it's just, I want to say over again, it's habit, and it's unconscious. Implicit and unconscious bias, you hear the terms used interchangeably because it's really necessary to just sort of realize that they're not the things that are in the forefront of our minds. Every article, every study, every work that you do will tie implicit bias into neuroscience, and it involves two types of thinking: system 1 thinking and system 2 thinking. And I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on the science of it. Just to acknowledge that it is. So system 1 is that fast thinking. It's the unconscious, automatic, effortless, and it assesses the situation, delivers updates, and it is the majority of how we think about things. We assess safety, we assess fast, we assess what's going on around us. We make decisions in a really, really quick way, and that's the super majority of how our thinking goes. It's emotional unconscious mode. Now, the system two thinking is the more slow, logical, effortful, conscious thought. And that's the one that's dominated by reason. We rationalize and we normalize. And we make meaning of system one. System one is like, it's coming. And system two is where we go like, oh, well, what does it really mean that I have that thought? And it's where we internalize, affirm, and confirm either some of the positive or negative stereotypes and prejudice that we hold. The defining characteristics of system two thinking is that it is slow and that it only makes up 1% of our thinking. And its purpose is to seek new and missing information. Now get back to implicit bias directly. So implicit bias refers to the automatic association of stereotypes or attitudes toward particular groups. But when they become habits, habits build systems that include and exclude those groups. And Anne talked about equity being a value of RAC as important, because we're doing this implicit bias conversation using our lens of equity, using our lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion, because that's part of what you're charged to do as reviewers. So when implicit bias operates in tandem with systems of oppression, with power, with privilege, and inequity, then they reinforce one another unconsciously. There's a couple things about biases that I want to, types of biases I want to name too. So affinity bias, there's the one where we gravitate toward people. Some biases are like, oh, I'm really comfortable with these kind of people like me, people like us. I believe these, I understand these people. I trust them. Their appearances and beliefs and backgrounds are comfortable to me. So I have a bias towards something. And attribution bias is really one where we closely link to performance bias. And usually attribution bias, there's a couple of biases that I pointed out in this session that are specific to different groups. Attribution bias most often is attached to women, where we see women less competent and we give less credit for their accomplishments or blame them more for their mistakes. And I'll say more about that a little bit later. Another one that's also really closely associated with likability bias is rooted in expectations. We expect men to be more assertive when they lead, so it feels natural. We expect women to be kind and communal, so when they assert themselves, we like them less. Maternal bias, because the whole motherhood thing triggers certain positive identities. And then performance bias, deep-rooted, incorrect assumptions about women and men's abilities. And it's a tendency to underestimate the performance of some over the other. I want to point, can anyone think of a really recent example of likability bias that's been in the news in the last couple of weeks? Okay, I want to suggest one then. The incident in the Tennessee legislature where the three elected officials, 2 Black men, 1 white woman, where they attempted to expel them. And the 2 Black men were actually expelled, fortunately. They have both gotten their jobs back and quickly, at least temporarily. And the white woman was not expelled. And if you watch any of the news coverage, you'll hear things like, well, she wasn't as loud as them, or she didn't violate the certain things that she did, or, she was just nicer about it. So that likability bias, because she's more like us, she's more like me, I can relate to her. I see this particular character as less threatening, as less harsh. So we'll give her the bias towards credit in that case. And that's what I want to talk about affinity biases, where we like people more. We give them that thumbs up attitude. We have positive associations. She's capable, trustworthy. She's people like me. Some of the most common ways where biases show up are in employment, obviously, recruiting and hiring and career development and product design and meetings and in compensation, and think about how these particular things show up in what you're charged to do, about selecting and allocating resources, about picking grantees, and about awarding projects with dollars. Here's some of the things that I picked a few that I really like about ways that we show our biases. Anybody not know what splaining means? Most commonly we hear it, most often you hear mansplaining, where a woman gives an idea, a thought, a suggestion, and it's not adhered to or appreciated or valued. And then a man will say, well, what she meant to say, or what she was trying to say, or I'm going to say it better because I can. And so that splaining is a way that our biases show up. We value the voices, minds, perspectives of some people over others. And we see it in not just in mansplaining, I certainly see it in age-splaining and other parts of our social identity group memberships. How about dismissing others' perceptions and feelings and imposing our truth on others? Like, oh, you didn't really mean that. And it's like, you're just wrong. You're just emotional. That's not okay. Some of the ways that we show our biases is in our body. I'll just move around, I'll get louder, interrupt, I'll shift in place, I show my discomfort, and certainly I'll raise my voice and interrupt. Those are some of the manifestations, the physical manifestations of some of our implicit biases. I don't always intend to act them out, but they show up in these sometimes but subtle ways, sometimes more less not subtle. Now, I want to go back to the very beginning and say biases are necessary. Our brains are supposed to create association and meaning out of things. We actually couldn't function without some degree of it. So it's not bad that it's quick, it's efficient to organize our thoughts. It's an efficient way to make sense out of what's going on around us. So it's the places that we have to pay attention to in this work is what are those things that we're not aware of that we're doing and how they're impacting our decision making. Look at this. This is called the Knieza triangle. And so a couple people unmute and tell me what you see.
I see little Pac-Mans.
Little Pac-Mans, great.
Two triangles.
Great.
Two triangles and three circles.
Great. And does it look like to anyone like there's two triangles, like that those white lines are triangles themselves?
Right.
And there really aren't, right? There are three angles and three circles. But we fill in the gaps with partial information. We sort things in a category and we create associations. And it's the same with our thoughts about people and systems. We create a story here that said, oh, there's two triangles that are superimposed on each other that actually aren't two triangles. Where there's invisible lines, we just made up a story and decided that's what it must be. That's how some ways that the implicit biases show up. We fill in gaps where there really isn't information and we make up a story designed to fit what we believe to be so. Now, this is where you're going to get into thinking about your work as reviewers and think about some of the common ways that bias shows up in evaluations. There's a higher bar and increased scrutiny for some people, some organizations, some kinds of work, some kinds of art, some kinds of demographic that we have we higher expectations or lower expectations, and And we don't, so we don't do a fairness thing. We go like, oh, well, I have a thought, a belief, an idea about certain things. And so there's a scrutiny that's placed there. Or there's the leniency one that, well, we excuse this because they're not as, well, expect much for them. This is good for those kind of people. So we have that kind of bias that shows up in our behavior. And then, we say likability as a penalty as well. In addition to the likability favors, there's also like, things like, it's like just patterns that irritate me because they can be so nice. And now we get into how we think about what we can do. So countermeasures, what can you do to mitigate some of the implicit biases that you see? So one, take a minute and pause, slow down, and just notice how quickly a thought becomes a bias, or how quickly a bias comes to you. Just put it into your awareness if you can. Adapt a mindset of humility. I don't know everything. I don't have to know everything. Normalizing. So that's where you sort of like, we gravitate to all kinds of things and make them normal. But shifting our minds to like, well, that doesn't necessarily have to be just the way it is, just because it's the way that I know it. And then the decoupling action is about looking at the structural supports, the systemic things that exist for biases to exist. So the actions that I know that you're taking and you're reviewing is you've got clear criteria that's been established ahead of the review. That's an important part of mitigating the impact of implicit bias. Equalizing the bar in evaluations. Notice the places where you're lenient, notice the places where there are exorbitant penalties. Block criticisms of personalities. That's a really, really big piece in a lot of things. Like, I like this person, I dislike this person. This is not about the personal, this is about the skills and the accomplishment that you're evaluating. And then finally, make sure that you take the test, take the time to review all the criteria, all the evaluations, to make sure that I see themes and trends of consistency or inconsistency, and unpack that where you need to. How people have been successful in doing this is always start with yourself. Always start with being aware of what your biases are. Become self-aware, not self-conscious, but have honest conversations with yourself and others. This doesn't need to be something that you're embarrassed about, or it's not about shaming people, but it's just about like owning, I gravitate toward, or I have a thing against, and there's a trick, as a hook or a trigger for me here, and just make that conscious for you to notice. You're going to critique the systems. You're not going to critique the people, like I said a few minutes ago. Authentic, like, just be as real as you can, even if it makes you feel vulnerable. Trust that this group of people that you're working with can hold your truth and your experience and your query and your journey, and be open about that. And don't worry about being wrong. Like, it's okay. We're all bound to make mistakes. The trick is, can we be corrected? Are we willing to change? Are we willing to not be so stuck in our position that we can't move at all? And again, push ourselves past our sort of growing comfort level. Discomfort is okay when you're doing with these materials. So I just want to say, do that work right there. And I'm going to go to here right now and ask you to talk about, how do you identify your implicit biases? What are the things that you have figured out so far that have help you become aware? And again, I'll ask you right now to unmute for a minute. In fact, I think I'll stop the share. unmute for a minute and just talk about yourself. Talk about places where you have noticed that you carry some biases. And let me before you start, this is a conversation that's never to be repeated. Don't talk about what your colleagues said. Just as I want to offer as much confidentiality as possible. But I want you to have a place to just journey with yourselves here. Go. If you're willing to talk about a place, an idea, a thought, a perspective that's been a place you struggled or learned or grown from. This would be, I'd love to hear a few thoughts now.
I get kind of stuck on bourgeois things when I read stories or descriptions and the house has a deck and big trees out front. And, you know, the guy steps out for his morning paper with his second cup of coffee. I become very upset because I think about how many people don't have that luxury and privilege.
Love that. Thank you. And what does that do? How does that feel like in your body?
It makes my heart beat. It makes the top of my head like feel hot as if it's going to blow up. So, you know, how dare you assume that everyone lives like you? That kind of, and I know that's irrational and that's not fair because of course some artists are going to come from that background.
Yeah. But thanks. I mean, there's a physiological dimension of this. It happens in our bodies. There's a reaction to when
Absolutely, it does.
Yeah, thanks. Anybody else?
How can I do this?
I
was just going to say, oh, go ahead.
I work a lot on practicing empathy. So I think that's what's worked for me is, you know, particularly if you're traveling in the city a lot. I mean, you see a lot of homeless populations at intersections and, you know, you just feel like, well, should I give them money or what should I do? And most people sort of look away. And I found myself starting to think about, you know, what brought them to that place. And at one point they were someone's child and just really trying to reflect a lot on empathy for them as people, if that makes sense.
It makes great sense. But say a little bit more about what is the bias that's triggered there. I got this is how I mitigate it, but I take my mindset to be empathetic. That's perfect. Now, but what's the thing that happened before that? Like, oh, these people or that thing. What came up first?
That's exactly what it was. It was disgust, I guess. And if I give them money, you know, are they just going to buy drugs or alcohol, you know? And so just a lot of thinking in my practice of empathy about it doesn't really matter what brought them there. It's just really trying to understand life circumstances. And I'm not perfect at it at all, particularly if they're aggressive. It frightens me. But, you know, I find that just to be, particularly the last couple of years, I've noticed a huge increase of people living on the street. And so, yeah, but yeah, it really came from a place of like wanting to roll up my window and look away and disgust and, you know, why can't they get a job? Or so, yeah, all the things.
Great. Thank you. I appreciate that. Someone else was about to say something when she started.
Oh, that was me. I was just going to say, you know, talking about feelings and what you feel, you know, you get the ever present gut feeling, like this doesn't feel right, you know, and you get that pinch or that ache, like, okay, this isn't right. Let me think about this. What's going on here? You know, so then you question it. They always say your stomach is, or your digestive tract is your second brain because of the amount of nerve endings that are there. And so I definitely feel when something's off or not right, you know, just on a personal level, you know, I experienced harassment in the workplace when I was much younger. And just knowing that this was not right, but what can I do about it at that position? You know, because I was an underling in this big corporation. So that, you know, if that feeling that this is not right, but, and to actually see it happen to somebody else, and what would I do if this would go much further, like to a lawsuit, for example? You know, would I be able to testify? Could I do this? You know, it's very strong.
And that is so important because you're drawing the distinction here that I wanted to make sure we held between the difference between explicit bias. These are, you know, sexist, you know, classes, whatever things that are illegal, that'll get you, you know, a civil rights violation or whatever. Like those are the things that we know how to mitigate because we have laws and policies and HR and all those kinds of things to deal with. It's the implicit ones that are subtle, that are underlying, that are unconscious. Those are the ones that we have to put our attention on because they don't, you know, we don't have policies against implicit bias. We have policies against racism. We have policies against sexism. But the implicit ones, the ways that we think and treat each other or react to something, those things, those are the ones that we have to like really take the time to understand and digest where they come from. The trick with implicit bias is that it is implicit. It's not so obvious.
Right. Not so obvious. Exactly. Thanks for making that differentiation.
No, thank you for bringing it up. If I can get back to the right screen, I will go back again. All right. All right, I'm going to do a little bit more on some of the characteristics of implicit biases because you've given a couple of great examples, but I want to hammer a few things. Implicit biases are pervasive and they are robust. Every single one of us has them, and even people like me, I will say like me, with avowed commitments to impartiality, avowed commitments to justice. Like there's no one of us that didn't get inundated with these attitudes that we have to work against. It goes against how I think of myself, and it's still true. Implicit biases, because of system one thinking, are more pervasive when we're under stress. So like we talked about, when I'm afraid of something, when I'm triggered by something, when I'm scared at work, scared on the streets, and I'm moving fast, when we're met with the unexpected, it can have other cognitive impacts like distractions or not paying attention or fear, or I like the part, I feel it in my gut. The implicit associations that we hold arise outside of our conscious awareness. They do not necessarily align with our declared beliefs or even reflect stances we would explicitly endorse. You know, I will say that, you know, every time I find myself thinking something that is inconsistent with my identity as a anti-racist, anti-sexist, whatever, but these things happen, I go like, wow, it's in there. Some trigger, old stuff just came to me. And so I have strong commitments to equity and inclusion and justice. It doesn't mean that these things won't come up in my mind as well. So they're outside of my conscious, the things that I've thought about. You know, we generally tend to hold implicit biases that favor our own in-group, though research has shown that we can still hold implicit biases against our own in-group. I know in the work that I do around anti-racism work, there's lots and lots of literature around the internalized racism and the way that people who are in a shared identity can be harsher on each other than people outside their identity. So it's both, and it's not like I'm not always gonna like side with or want the people who look like me, because they may bother me in ways that are particularly unique to being the in-group. In fact, I will own that, you know, I'm sometimes more judgmental of people with my shared background than not. I have to work at one I've had to work on a lot. whole point of this session is to understand that they have real world effects on our lives, our interactions, our behavior, our leadership, our actions, our jobs. You know, if we don't do the work to really unearth and elevate into our consciousness the ways that we have implicit biases and stay unaware about them, they will affect how you score artists, how you evaluate the applications. I really want you to take a little bit of time to just prepare yourself to go, oh, these are the things that hook me, or these are the things that, yeah, I'm always in favor of this kind of group or this kind of artist or this kind of work, and these things not so much. So I like this kind of dance, but not that kind of dance. I understand this kind of dance and not that kind of this painting works for me, and this one I don't want in my house. So notice the kind of things that could potentially derail you from being objective in how you score the work that you're doing. This is the hopeful part of it all, the malleability of it. The implicit associations that we form can gradually be unlearned and replaced with new mental associations. I think, why even bother if you can't change? It's not, these biases that we have, we learned them, we inherited them, we experienced them from all kinds of places. The good news is that we weren't born with them, and we can unlearn them as much as we learned them. Gonna keep thinking about how we think about mitigation. So I talked about a little bit about debiasing is the action taken to reduce bias. It refers to the wide variety of techniques, methods, and interventions that are designed to eliminate or lessen the potential errors, distortions, or other mistakes in our judgment, thinking, and decision-making. I love the DEI mindset, and that's part of why, implicit bias work, unconscious bias work, and diversity inclusion work are so coupled together. So first thing is you face it. You own the bias, and you develop and maintain positive self-regard for yourself and others. You have to just be as clear as you can to just look at it. You interrupt it. Interrupt is these are all action things. Look at it, own it, interrupt it, go like, no, this isn't okay. I want to do better. I want to be better than this bias would have me be. And you also, some people say call out. It is call out. It's call out the behavior. This thing that you did, this thing is not okay. You don't call people out though. See that difference between call out the behavior and calling the person? I'm calling out this behavior because I want to call you into relationship. I want to call you into partnership. I want to call you into being the best that you can be. So never blame people for the distresses or the things, the mistakes we make, but just honor them and interrupt the behavior that needs to be challenged. Look at these two mindsets, and you want to stop doing these things. You want to stop saying good, bad, right? These are good and bad people, and you want to consider we're all a work in progress. We're all on continuums of awareness together. There are many ways to think about things instead of just a north-south side thing. You're never invalidating people. That's not what you're invalidating. You're challenging behavior that people do, but it's not the people. And to say that then good people are not biased, well, that's just impossible to believe because we are all biased. None of us escaped learning certain things, believing certain things, getting hammered with certain beliefs about different folks. So I'm going to repeat a couple of things though. Slow down, practice mindfulness, practice vulnerability, engage your mental breaks. Be vigilant in monitoring and managing your own biases and fears and microaggressions. acknowledge them in positive self-regard, and try these mindsets. Human worth not equal to human behavior. The approach to human worth, all humans have value. The approach to human behavior is based on conditioning, may be good behavior, may be bad behavior. And blame is never a good thing. So not my fault. I'm not to blame for this. That doesn't mean that I'm not responsible for it. Responsibility doesn't include blame, shame, or guilt. So these things are going on in my name and I need to do something about it, but I do not need to be blamed for their existence. Responsible for interrupting their persistence is different. I'm not one, honestly, that has done a lot of visualization, and it is a practice. You know, I think it's part of my own work still to be done. Like just dream and imagine a different possibility. But I think that's it's one that I'm working on. That's why I'm sort of owning it. I still have trouble doing that one for myself. But practice visualizing things as a way to be open to new possibilities. All these things that I'm showing you, some of them fit you, some of them don't, some of them fit me, some of them don't, some of them will fit your colleagues. Just think about which ones of those really speak to you and your experience. You know, curiosity is probably one of the most helpful things about mitigating biases. Like, be curious. You know, get out more, expand your social networks, interact with people who have different lifestyles, life experiences, life stories, identities, demographics than you. It's a really cool way to mitigate your biases and everyday actions. It's just to be curious. I wanna caution a little bit about curiosity. There's a habit that some people demonstrate when, like, oh, I'm meeting someone new and I want to ask them a million questions. You know, so here, this is how I get to know you. I ask this and this and this. And it becomes not a relationship building experience. It becomes an interview. It becomes oh, I have to find out these things. Generally, that's not helpful for people. It's more useful to just create an environment where people can share information about themselves. If I ask you 40 questions, I have decided what's important about you, what's important to know, and it doesn't leave you room to be able to just share yourself openly and to tell me what's important about you. So try to be curious in a way that's not overpowering the person with your agenda. Mistakes will be made, period. Clean them up. Don't be defensive in difficult conversations. Just think of every mistake that I've made or that I will make and I'm still making. I got to try to hold it as a chance to learn and grow. You know, I spent one of my clients has an organization that I work with has this zero tolerance for racism policy within the organization. And if you make a mistake, you are out the door. You know, a lot of people are out the door because they made a mistake. And there's a different mindset that says we have a zero tolerance for this kind of bad behavior. That doesn't mean you're automatically kicked out the door. What the zero tolerance means, we're a learning and growing environment, and we have to acknowledge these mistakes, and we have to help each other, and we have to improve. We don't just summarily dismiss people because they made a mistake, because all of us will, and we'll be kind of alone if we're doing that. And then I want to speak a little bit about strategies to reduce bias. So, let me breathe a minute. Here's some practices that you can adopt. I'm not objective. Doubt it when anyone says they're objective. Seeing yourself as objective tends to increase the role of implicit bias. Teaching people about non-conscious thought processes ultimately allows us to guard against biased evaluations. Anytime you hear someone say, I'm completely objective, you know that they're not honest. You know that they're like, there's no way any of us could be completely objective. What I'm saying is that I have a perspective, and I'm trying to not let this perspective dominate every single decision that I make. But, you know, just doubt that whole, you know, objectivity couldn't possibly exist. You have a perspective, and you want to make sure that that you include that, but that doesn't rule everything. Seek fairness rather than being driven by fear of judgment. That's a way to sort of, when you increase the motivation to be fair, it's how we sort of decrease biased actions. I think this, just by doing this, spending this time together, it's obvious that RAC wants you to like engage yourself in just fair practices. That was I think Anne's first words. Improve conditions of decision making. So implicit biases are a function of automaticity. I mean, they just happen. Engage ourselves in mindful, deliberate thinking prevents our implicit biases from kicking in and determining everything. So everything doesn't have to just be stimulus response. Here's my answer to everything. Just be as deliberate as possible in decision-making processes. Data. Implicit bias behavior is best detected by using data to determine whether certain patterns of behavior lead to disparate outcomes. When you notice patterns, when you notice trends, it's not just about counting numbers, but it is about noticing if there are trends, if there are obvious patterns associated with class or race or gender or sex. Just count that, pay attention to that, do that as a part of your decision making as well. And then monitor and improve the environment. Priming the environment helps create bias association. So we want to make sure that the space that we're in, the relationships that we have are as thoughtful and aware as possible. I was, let me see myself in the environment, physical environment included. Anybody know the story of when you want to sell your house, the real estate market will tell you to take everything out of it that looks like it has any kind of cultural or ethnic markers. So you want to just neutral colors, neutral art, neutral things. That's the neutral is kind of the standard for the environment, and neutral is neutral. There's no such thing as neutral. So when we say we're doing something neutral, it means we're adhering to the practice that who you are doesn't matter, that your inherent values, nature, cultures doesn't matter. And so in many ways, neutral just means whiteness simply, like I want to make it look as white as possible. So interrupting whiteness is one thing that we do sometimes just with the physical environment. Use culturally inviting environmental prompts around you. I talked a little bit about collecting data to monitor outcomes because implicit bias cannot be reliably self-reported. That's why you look at the goals and the data, because they can't say, well, yeah, my implicit bias would have me do this. So just look at the trends and outcomes that came from it. Like you're doing now, a cross-section of decision makers is really important. Institutional mechanisms to reduce bias is really important, and affirmatively state and pursue inclusive outcomes. Make it as Anne Hubbard said at the very beginning of this is a value that we hold. Equity is a value that the Regional Arts Commission holds, and we want to say that as many ways as possible so that you can know this is the environment that we're working in. And I'm gonna close this up and invite you into conversation for the last period of time. Yep, the time that we have left. Thoughts, questions, query, comment, reflections, anything that you want to offer here would be great. I didn't mean to talk as fast as I did. I just want to make sure I got through everything.
Hi. I just want to mention that I love that the grant reviewers will have these score sheets that help us reduce bias. You have to justify your opinion, not just, oh, I like this art or I like this project. I'd love to see this. I love that score sheet will really help reduce bias there. So thank you for that.
Tools.
And I also love that you mentioned having goals and stating them. It's not enough to say, oh, we're going to increase diversity of our board of directors at my organization. We need numbers. We're going to say we need to be 50%, whatever, a percent, a number, and a date, the real goals. So I appreciate that too. Thank you for mentioning that.
Thank you for putting that and calling out. Is
Rudy.
bias always bad? I see a question in there. Is bias always bad? It's not. Bias is important. We have them. It's just that what happens to them and how they operate can be good or bad. There are some biases that keep us safe, that manage time, get work done. When you couple the biases with inequities, with disparity, with systemic issues of oppression, that's what we're trying to mitigate against. So the bias that I have about a group of people because they belong to this culture, identity, race, gender, whatever, that's the stuff that we're trying to make sure is really elevated in our conversation.
I have a question. What is taste? We talk about art and taste, and either you have certain kind of taste for things, or you find other types of art or expression distasteful. What is taste? Is that a bias?
I think we all have preferences, that things that we like, right? And
Sure.
yeah, so I mean, you could call that a bias. I'm biased towards, like I said, affinity bias. I'm biased towards ballet and biased against modern dance or something, right? This is the one that like really, I'd rather see this kind of performance than that kind of performance. This fits my personal interest, taste, passion, whatever. It's biased. It doesn't mean it's bad. It's just what it is. It's how I judge that. It's just because I prefer or like or am more entertained by something or stimulated by something shouldn't dictate who gets resources because of my personal biases. It shouldn't dictate who we value just because it's not the thing that I particularly am interested in. All of us like what we like. Can we like what we like and then maintain this posture of equity in the allocation of resources and the allocation of grant making in this policy?
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, I love these notes. Cultural experience certainly shape our taste as well as socioeconomic experiences. It's great. Anybody else have a question or comment?
Rudy, this is Madeline. I was curious if you have any suggestions or like mantras of things as we're potentially doing these reviews to almost check ourselves, right? If we're noticing that maybe some bias is coming in, or maybe just as going through, is there a phrase or a mantra that you have used that kind of helps you check yourself?
A phrase or a mantra? Anyone can chat one out there if you have one. I think the value, I just think that reminding myself that the value of inclusion and equity and equal access to resources is what we're all about. And it's not about, my job as an evaluator isn't about just giving to the organization or the artist who I like. It's about making sure that the entire region, the entire audience base is also, getting a chance to get to be served by what the grant making is doing. Yeah, I love that mantra. It's not about me. Thank you. Who wrote that one? Because it's never about me. It's about the job that I've agreed to do, and it's about bigger than me is I accept responsibility for doing this job in a thoughtful and inclusive way.
How do you look at biases versus opinions? That can lead to discussion of, maybe it's not a bias, it's just an opinion.
Yeah. Well, what do you think about that, Clarice? Just say what you think about it.
I think sometimes we think we have a bias about something when we honestly just have an opinion, and maybe if we just talk about it, we can kind of come to some type of conclusion where we just see things differently. It's not, sometimes I think when you think of biases, you're thinking that you got something against something, but it's not that you really have something against it. It's just your opinion in that area.
Yeah, it's like, of course we have opinions, right? I think about this. I'm well thought about this, not so well thought about that. So there are areas of conversation that I'm like, oh, I can go toe to toe debates, because I've done a lot of mental work around, thinking about this thing. So I have strong opinions about something. Sometimes your biases are not necessarily so well thought out, but they're more about, the feeling, a pull, a hook. So I get irritated by this thing. It's not like I even have a rational explanation for it. Your opinions are generally rooted in your best thinking or some strong, ideology that you believe. That's what's different. And biases, again, can be towards or against something. Don't forget, like, bias is not always like, I just am in favor of these things, as opposed to I really think this is a really good idea. Not all of our behavior is rational, but some of it is. Did that help, Clarice?
Yes. Mhm.
Anybody else have a question, thought, or comment? And if no question, just a couple of people say that something that you're taking away from the time you spent here, or how, mostly how this will affect your ability to do your job as evaluators. What's important? What's really, how does this elevate your ability to be successful, in achieving what you're asked to do? Or what could get in your way still? That's also important. Who hates math? Who could say something? Math is so much fun.
Hi, this is Sarah. So I made that comment about math because I taught early childhood students in teacher education math methods. And the first thing I would have them do would be to talk about how they saw themselves as a math person. And unfortunately, a lot of early childhood student teachers will say that they chose early childhood because they weren't good at math. So I would have them write their math story. So they had to write a story about where they came from with math, what their earliest experiences were with math, because they're going to go out and teach children. So there had to be a conversation about how do we teach so that children don't grow up and say they hate math. So my point was just the things that happen to us in childhood, our early experiences that we haven't really thought about could be a key to why we think what we think now. That's it.
That's perfect. And it's not just about math, obviously, Sarah, right?
Right.
It's the way we were set up. Some experiences set us up to like things. Some experiences set us up to fear things. Some experiences set us up to run towards things and run away from things. Some of that makes sense. Some things it's okay to, and it doesn't, we're not trying to say everybody has to like everything, but we should be able to own that some of it was just what was presented to us.
Yes.
It took some time for me to open up to creativity, not just skill or in preference to skill. I like that comment, Janet. Will you say something about that, if you will? I'm sort of intrigued by it.
Thank you. I'd like to speak to that. Many, many years ago, I found myself in the good place of being accepted as an artist mentor in a program for adults with developmental disabilities. And I was really excited for my first day on the job. I had a great lesson plan. We were going to do artist notebooks, and they were going to draw on their artist notebooks for their future projects. And I was going to help them develop these projects, and we would all have a great time. And so I brought my project to the table for the first day. And it didn't occur to me for even 1 minute that at least half my students wouldn't be able to read. And I learned that very quickly. And I was so exhausted at the end of the day, realizing I had to toss out my whole lesson plan and just be open to what happened. And over the years, I've really learned to sit and observe for a long time before I try to step in. And also to try to learn to see where each person is going with their project or their idea, and that they will have their way of approaching it, and how can I best help them in that respect. And it was a pretty exciting learning experience for me to be a teacher. I learned a lot being a teacher in that situation. So being open, not preferencing skill over creativity in all cases. You can always help somebody achieve some skill, but they may show you in 20 minutes that they can toss out 12 different highly creative ideas that you may never have thought of. Just how to help them get there is the issue for me.
Wow. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
I appreciate that a lot. And I mean, in so many ways, there's a dominant narrative about what is good, what is smart, what is valuable, what is successful, what is better, and that there's better than, less than, and that I really appreciate you taking the time to say, hey, I got to wake up here. I had a place where I had to examine my own biases here and see that what I was doing wasn't helpful. And that's all we're ever, that's what we're asking all of us to do. Like, wow, maybe you'll be as able to do like you and Sarah did about, I saw the early stuff that set me up to think that, maybe not, but just to notice that there's really a pattern here. There's a value, there's a pattern, there's a behavior here that suggests I gravitate toward or against, or I even treat people differently, or in many cases, and what we're doing here today, I'm going to judge and evaluate, which is why the things you said, having selected criteria, having it very specific that you have to explain your thinking about what you're doing, setting this value of it in the first place of inclusion and equity as important, like putting it all out there. Maybe you'll be lucky enough to know where it came from, or be able to like, oh yeah, this old pattern, there it goes again. But to just be able to own it and then reevaluate it in the moment is just fabulous. So thank you for that story.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And did I say you're innocent? We're blameless. We should never be blamed for the biases that we have. What we need to be is responsible for them and make sure that that we don't let them run our thinking, our behaviors, and our actions all the time. So I'm just going to review a couple things just before, for my closing, to make sure that we did it. So our purpose again today was to make sure that the work that you do and the grantees that apply receive fair reviews and that are as free of inappropriate influences as possible. Just hold that as your vision, your value, and that the criteria, the selection criteria that has been developed for you is what you should be using. You adhere to this. I don't know the whole criteria, but I think it will help to mitigate any chances that there are biases if you stick closely, if you follow the criteria as you have been trained to do. Despite having objective criteria, you still have to own that all of us have biases. We have to own that they'll happen, they'll show up in how we think, and that there are things that we can do to mitigate them. So slow down, notice your patterns. You've got the tools to act, to review the things, but just notice you in it. Like, each one of us is going to read these criteria a little bit differently because we're reading them as who we are. So slow down, take the time to notice that you have had some biases. Put yourself in the center. Notice the difference between those biases that are explicit, easy to identify, classist, racist, sexist commentary. That's just so easy. It's the ones that are less identifiable. It's the belief system. Implicit biases are about a belief system, and they're value-based. They're beliefs system that some people are better than others. Some things are more or less valuable than others, more intelligent, more capable, more successful, etc. That the unconscious biases live in our minds as habit. They're habitual ways of thinking, and that these habits impact how we make decisions, and their attitudes, and the attitudes that we hold are influenced by other factors more than just thought or reasoning. That's in our brains. There's two different kinds of thinking. System one, the unconscious, automatic, effortless thought, and then the system two, the slow, logical, effortful, conscious thought. System two thinking, the slow, conscious, is where we rationalize and normalize, and this is how we can affirm and confirm stereotypes or prejudices, because this is what we're doing to make meaning of system one. And finally, there's dimensions of biases, the affinity bias. I really am drawn toward people like me, people who behave like me, who draw like me, who live like me, whatever, and then I give attribution to, like, oh, this kind of bias means that you are this kind of person, you're kind of smart, and I attribute this to your identity, I attribute this to your education, I attribute this to your background in some ways, and those affinity biases are ones that I really give the thumbs up to. I give them the pass. I give them the benefits, the extra benefits, and some of the patterns that you'll notice when the unconscious biases are at play, or when we find ourselves needing to explain better because I can explain it better because I'm a man, or I'm dismissing someone's idea, or when my body just can't sit still and listen. I'm discomfort and I get louder and I want to interrupt things. And that when there's not full information, we make up stories and we sort things into categories that fit what we believe. In our evaluations, the things we need to look forward to pay attention to are, do we have a higher bar and increased scrutiny for some people or some patterns? Are we more lenient with some people and some behaviors and some patterns? And does the fact that we like someone or dislike someone, is there a penalty or advantage for likability? So slow down, take your time, be humble, and be self-aware as much as you can. You're not critiquing people. And whenever you think there are no implicit biases present, there are implicit biases present. They are pervasive and they are robust, and they will keep coming, and we all have them, and we don't need to blame ourselves for them. They're triggered when we're in stress, or when we're, feeling afraid, or when we're moving too fast. So pay attention to your body when you're doing things, and they can go against everything that we believe about ourselves. I know I'm a good person. I declare that I have these values, and yet these implicit biases can show up in my behavior and my attitude as well. And finally, you're doing this because they have real world impact. And the good news is that we cannot be run by them. We can change them. They are malleable. We can take the sort of the weight out of them, and call it out, call it in, face our own, interrupt when we see it, give each other a hand, and be responsible for it. Blame, no. Responsible, yes. That's the mindset that I think is really important. And finally, when you make a mistake, clean it up. Clean it up. When someone says something, you're like, no, I'm objective about that. We know that there's no such thing, that all of us, our values always show up some way. So be willing to learn, be willing to grow, and be willing to fix any mistakes that we made. And I think that's the things that I want to make sure that I reinforced. So anything else anyone need to ask or tell? All right, Anne, you got any closing comments that you need to send us home with?
Rudy, thank you so much for this conversation. And I think it's necessary. And I think you gave us a lot of tools to mitigate bias in the process as this application review process begins. The DEI mindset, the countermeasures, very, very concrete ways we can do it. Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for attending this afternoon. And I posted again in the chat the link to the RAC website, the page where you can find the video from today and also the PowerPoint. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to email us at grants@racstl.org. And I'll add that into the chat as well.
All right. Well, thank you all for doing it, both for hanging in here with this session, and as a RAC commissioner for doing the work to support the organization and making sure that the arts community is well served. Much, much appreciation to each of you. Thanks. And I gave you 16 minutes back, so thank you. You're welcome for the gift.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Rudy.
Thanks, Anne.